It wasn't silence that greeted me when I arrived. It was a hum, low, dense, and endless, like standing too close to a dying engine or the breath of some ancient mechanical creature buried just beneath the surface. The air was thick, wet with heat, and strangely metallic. I stepped out of the machine and into a world that felt like it had stopped remembering itself. The sky wasn't blue. It wasn't even sky. It was a blistered haze, pale and blinding, like the inside of a closed eyelid. I reached down to touch the ground, expecting dust or ash or stone, but it was none of those. The surface was smooth and warm, almost pliable, like sun-scorched glass left to melt in the open. No wind, no shadows, no scent of life, just that slow, vibrating hum and the distant illusion of movement far beyond the horizon. They say 1 billion years is just a number, but when you stand inside it, when you breathe it, you feel how wrong that is. Time here isn't moving forward anymore. It's sinking, folding into itself like a dried leaf curling in the sun. Everything about this place feels softened, as if the sharp edges of the planet had been filed down by centuries of nothing. I looked for familiar shapes, trees, buildings, mountains, but found only folds in the terrain, like ripples in cooling wax. The earth had not been destroyed. It had not been crushed, burned, or shattered. It had simply endured. And in that endurance, it had forgotten how to be alive. My hands still trembled from the jump. The machine behind me, if you could even call it that, was silent now, its glowing core dimmed, as though it too was mourning something. I glanced back instinctively, hoping for the comfort of return. But there was no return. The dials were frozen. The coordinates locked. I had arrived, yes, but not in the future. Not really. I had arrived at the edge of a memory. A place that once held oceans and birdsong and the ache of breathing lungs, and now held only echoes pressed into heat. They told me the sun would be brighter, that one day it would shine 10% more fiercely, heating the earth beyond the point of habitability. I had read the numbers. I had traced the graphs, but nothing prepared me for the way it felt. This closeness, this oppressive light. It didn't illuminate. It overwhelmed. There were no shadows because there was nowhere for light not to touch. It was not a sun anymore. It was an eye. Staring, unblinking, watching a world that no longer watched back. And for a moment, I wondered if time itself had stayed behind. I walked for hours across that dead plain, though time had lost all meaning here. The ground beneath my boots had no give, no memory of rain. It cracked in some places, not from dryness, but from thermal fatigue. Centuries of expanding and shrinking under a sun that had grown merciless. The heat wasn't the kind you escape from. It wasn't an afternoon heat. It was structural. It lived inside the bones of the planet, baked into every molecule. Even my breath, filtered and cooled by the suit, felt heavy as if oxygen had turned viscous, something to swallow rather than inhale. But it wasn't just the heat that unnerved me. It was the absence. There were no insects, no breeze, no sound except the low hiss of my own machinery. Earth, once cacophonous and alive, was now silent in texture. The oceans were gone, not hidden beneath crust or frozen in shadowed craters. Gone. Vaporized. Their memory lifted into the stratosphere and lost to space. 1 billion years ago, the sun began to swell, just slightly, less than a degree per 100 million years. But compound that over eons, and the balance tips, a runaway greenhouse effect. Atmospheric water escaping in streams invisible to the eye. And when the last of it was gone, there was nothing left to trap carbon, nothing to cycle life. The great blue lungs of the planet had exhaled for the final time, and no breath had followed. The air now, if you could call it that, was thick with residual steam, a slow chemical soup of trace gases and abandoned compounds. I saw no clouds, only vast veils of white like stretched skin across the sky. Vegetation, of course, had vanished long ago. Without water, without carbon dioxide, even the hardiest photosynthetic organisms had perished. No mosses, no algae, not even lichen clinging to stone. The rocks were sterile, smooth, scoured clean by 1 billion years of solar radiation. And yet, as I knelt by a ridge that once might have been a riverbank, I thought I saw something. Stratified layers in the sediment, like fingerprints fossilized in time. It could have been geological, sure, or maybe not. Maybe it was a whisper. A suggestion that the earth, even in its death, remembered something of the rhythms that once moved through its body. Tides, currents, rain. The heat rose in waves off the horizon, blurring distance. My visor compensated, recalibrating constantly, but I still felt unmoored, as if walking through a mirage that had become real. And above me, that pale and blazing sun, closer now, or maybe just angrier, loomed without warmth, just light, endless and indifferent, and I realized without breath there can be no echo. I waited until nightfall, though I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. The light didn't dim so much as it thinned, like breath caught in a narrowing throat. The sun slipped sideways behind the curve of the horizon, but the sky remained restless, glowing faintly with scattered radiation. No stars appeared, no coolness came, and the moon was gone. Not hidden, not eclipsed, gone. Not even a phantom of it lingered above. Just a sky so bare it felt unfinished, like a ceiling with its lantern removed. They say the moon is drifting away from us, even now, 3.8 centimeters per year. It's such a small, polite number, harmless. But timescales are cruel. Over millions of years, the moon slips further and tidal forces weaken. The Earth's rotation slows, eclipses become imperfect, then impossible, and then silence. The gravitational waltz that once pulled at our oceans, that stirred our tectonic plates and made night into a mirror of rhythm and renewal, was over. The moon, once our counterbalance, our steady companion, had vanished into distance, lost to orbital entropy and the indifference of expansion. Without it, the nights lost their tempo. The planet's axis, now more vulnerable to chaos, may have wobbled into new extremes. I imagined seasons stretched into unbearable cycles, or perhaps erased altogether, permanent summer or winter with no end. But what struck me most was the absence of shadow. The moon had been our soft lamp in the dark, our anchor in a sky full of wandering fire. It pulled more than tides. It pulled meaning, myth, and now that anchor had snapped. I found a shallow crater, ancient, filled with layers of dust so fine they seemed to hover above the ground. My boots barely left a mark. Perhaps the moon had once created this, a kiss from a meteor deflected into Earth's skin by its own gravitational tug. Now, without the moon's presence to pull at space debris, the sky would be quieter, emptier, and yet more fragile. No protection, no shield, just open vulnerability under a sun that was no longer merciful. And yet, what frightened me most wasn't the physical change. It was what we lost in rhythm. How time once flowed with the moon's cycles, waxing and waning, shaping calendars, stories, rituals. Without that anchor, time feels less like a river, more like a flat surface stretching endlessly in all directions. I stared at the blank sky and felt unmoored in a way no map or machine could correct. No moon, no tides, no mirror for the soul of night. There was a moment, as I stood beneath that pale expanse, when I reached up without thinking, as if the stars might still be there, just beyond some veil I hadn't yet pierced. But the sky didn't respond. No constellations, no patterns, no familiar names, just a washed-out dome of quiet radiation pulsing faintly like the afterimage of something already lost. I felt not alone, but unwitnessed, like a word spoken in a vacuum, vibrating only in the speaker's chest. The stars hadn't disappeared. Not all of them. They had simply moved on, drifting across the fabric of the galaxy with glacial patience. Proper motion, they call it. Stars that once drew lines in our skies, Orion's belt, the Big Dipper, had shifted, unraveled, like a story retold so many times its meaning comes loose. Others had died. Brilliant blue giants, short-lived and furious, had gone supernova in bursts brighter than entire galaxies. Their light may still be traveling. It might pass this place in 1,000,000 years or 1 billion more. But here now, in this moment, I saw only absence. And yet the absence had texture, a darkness that wasn't empty but dense, as though it held secrets too heavy to shine. I imagined Betelgeuse, once swollen and trembling on the edge of collapse, finally letting go, scattering elements that would never coalesce again. Somewhere in this silence, its remnants drifted, a memory without audience. The Milky Way itself may have already merged with Andromeda by now, forming a new, unrecognizable structure. A swirl of matter where our home once spun quietly on a spiral arm. I turned slowly, scanning the horizon, and felt the vastness press in, not as fear, but as a kind of reverence. The stars had guided us once. They pulled our ships across oceans, marked the harvest, anchored myths. Now they were undone, their light scattered, faded, or consumed. There were no points of reference left. Only slow gradients of gloom, a canvas wiped clean. And then, faintly, a flicker. Low in the atmosphere, near the edge of sight. I froze. It wasn't a star, it was debris, a shard of something ancient tumbling through upper air, possibly a fragment of a long-dead satellite or the bones of a machine that had once spoken with the sky. It caught the last of the sun's glare and vanished just as quickly. Like a gesture remembered, then forgotten again. I stood still for a long time, and for the first time I realized this sky had forgotten us. It took me longer than I expected to realize what I wasn't seeing. I'd been scanning the landscape for hours, for ruins, for tools, for any trace of architecture, even a single carved stone. But the earth had done what it does best. It had buried us, or more precisely, outlasted us. Not with violence, not with catastrophe, but with time. Our monuments had crumbled, our cities weathered into particles, and even the materials we'd once claimed as eternal, concrete, steel, plastic, had surrendered to molecular decay and planetary drift. There were no bones, no machines, no books. If humanity had been here, it had passed through like breath on glass, visible for a moment, then gone without residue. I crouched at the edge of a collapsed basin, hoping absurdly for a sign, an engraving, a shard, even a misplaced bolt. Nothing. Only a cross-section of Earth's skin, layer upon layer of sediment, pressed together by pressure and deep time. I traced the lines with my fingers. Somewhere in these compressed echoes, we had existed. We had spoken, loved, destroyed, built. And now, silence. Perhaps we had left, flung ourselves across stars, and settled in cooler, younger systems. Perhaps we had uploaded our minds into machines drifting as light through artificial heavens. Or perhaps we had simply unraveled, too slow to adapt, too proud to retreat. Whatever the truth, it wasn't here. It's strange how loss feels heavier in the absence of pain. There were no scars in the earth, no smoke, no broken skeletons of forgotten war. Just the emptiness that follows after forgetting. I had imagined this journey would be filled with grief or awe or at least spectacle. But what I felt instead was diffusion. As if I, too, was beginning to fade, absorbed into the slow stillness of this place. My voice, trapped behind layers of synthetic breath. My thoughts, flattened by a silence too vast to answer them. I tried to picture a face, any face, a friend, a stranger, but the features kept slipping away, like trying to recall a dream in full daylight. We had built so much on the idea of permanence. Cities meant to outlive us, languages meant to bind us. But even the stars had shifted. Even the moon had left. Why did we think we would stay? And then a thought came, sudden and sharp. Maybe this was always meant to be the final chapter. Not a tragedy, not a failure, but a return to stillness. I climbed a ridge just before the last of the light began to bend. The terrain fell away in smooth, wind-polished layers, like frozen waves in a sea that forgot how to move. Below me stretched a horizon that didn't end, only dissolved, folding into the colorless sky like two mirrors, reflecting silence back and forth forever. There was no dusk anymore, only a slow draining of contrast, as if the world itself was slipping beneath a thin film of sleep. And then, in that final hour, I saw it, a glint. Not bright, not loud, just a subtle gleam on the edge of shadow. At first I thought it was a mirage, another trick of heat and radiation. But as I approached, the shape resolved. Angular, metallic, buried in sediment so old it no longer had a name. I brushed the dust aside. The object was small, barely a meter across, pitted and bleached. No symbols, no function I could recognize, but unmistakably made. Someone, somewhere had placed this. Long ago. Perhaps us, perhaps not. And suddenly, against all reason, I felt it. The weight of a handprint long vanished. The warmth of a mind I would never meet. It wasn't hope, not exactly. It was something older. A flicker of kinship across epochs. A quiet knowing that someone else had once looked into this same endless sky and wondered if it would remember them. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat with it. Let the wind pass over me. Dry, electric, laced with distant ions. I listened for voices in that thin air, for the crackle of a name or the murmur of a song. Nothing came. But even in that nothing, there was presence. Behind me, the sun began to bleed its final color across the curve of the earth. Not gold, not red. Something else, something washed out and weary, like the last page of a well-loved book. The light caught the edges of the land one last time, turning dust to silver and stone to quiet fire. I stood slowly. The object, whatever it was, remained where I'd found it, half buried, half remembered. A seed in a soil that no longer grew. And as the light faded, I felt it in my chest. Not sorrow, but completion. as if the planet, after all its spinning, had finally come to rest. It had given everything, held everything, and now it waited for no one. I turned back toward the machine, its doors still open, humming faintly with residual charge. Maybe it would take me further, maybe nowhere at all. I didn't know, but I knew this. We were never meant to last forever, only long enough to matter. So now, as the stars forget their names and the winds carve new lines no one will read, I ask you, what if the only thing the universe remembers is that we once tried?